Benjamin, you said that as far as the coaching carousel goes, the Cardinals kind of had a reset with their hiring of Monty Ossenfort, and it seems like maybe the only candidate that would be turned off by Ossenfort would be Payton. But how's this thing reshaping, in your opinion?
Well, I mean, you're going to look at different candidates that you might not have looked at before. In fact, I'll break a little news for you now. You guys are going to interview John Gannon. That announcement will probably come tomorrow. That you'll get an interview for him. So Jonathan Gannon from the Philadelphia Eagles defensive coordinator. Now, you have competition with the Houston Texans for him, but you will at least interview him. So something I hinted at on Twitter before, but I'll let you know that's going to happen. So it'll change some of the candidates, people that he's tied to, worked with, has relationships with, things like that. I think will be more in play. Prior to getting a GM, I think Sean Payton was very much on the mark. I think the fact that you've got Monty in there, who, by the way, is very respected. I'll say that it's not a bad thing for anybody else, but for Sean Payton, that's not really his guy, and so I think that may put a little bit of a drag on any speculation there.
Well, let's pivot to one of Monty's guys. If Sean Payton isn't his guy, what about Brian Flores? A lot of people connecting the dots, the relationship dating back with the New England Patriots, and the fact that Brian Flores was able to go into Miami and win double-digit games with a subpar roster and bad quarterback play. And then you think about kind of the hard-ass nature of Brian Flores. Do you think that's the perfect marriage? And when this, hiring cycle is over, would you be surprised if Monty opts to go with his ex-New England crony and Brian Flores?
I wouldn't be surprised by it. There's some things around the league because of the litigation that there's some places definitely that Brian would not be welcome, but Arizona seems to be one that's free and clear. So I wouldn't be surprised by that. There is the relationship there. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility.
Benjamin, let's get down to brass tacks with Sean Payton, because Bo and I were playing devil's advocate here for the past 5 minutes. I've listened to your podcast. The Sean Payton saga, it feels a little bit like fool's gold, does it not? With the amount of money, with the amount of picks, the lack of winning without Drew Brees, and now this dog and pony show that's going on right now where he wanted the LA jobs, he wanted the Cowboy job. Like, where does the Payton saga stand for you as somebody who covers the Broncos and the league right now?
I'm a little worried about it, man. I'm not the biggest Sean Payton fan when it comes to all this. I mean, all things being equal, I think I'd be okay with it. But the fact you're giving up draft capital, and it's not my money to spend, so I don't care what the salary is. But
right.
As far as giving up the draft capital and everything else, I don't know. What has Sean Payton ever done without Drew Brees? He got his play calling duties taken away when he was the offensive coordinator for Jim Fossil. He turns around, goes back to Parcells, claims he discovered Tony Romo. That was the scouting department. He turns around, parlays that into a job in New Orleans. And I'm not saying he's not a good coach, because he's obviously a good coach, but is he a great coach? And that's sort of the thing here. I mean, Drew Brees was Drew Brees before he got to Sean Payton. If you go back and you look at that season he had, and I believe it was 2004 with the Chargers, on a per throw basis, it was superior statistically to almost every season he ever had with Sean Payton. He just threw the ball 250 times less. So the raw totals don't look as high as they did, in the prime years with Sean Payton. If Sean Payton were the be all end all, then why in the season he was suspended and went to for Bountygate, did the Saints score 460 something points, and he comes back the next year and that total drops to 414, and that wasn't an aberration. The year after that was 401. The year after that was 408. So it's something that I'm like, well, wait a minute. If Sean Payton was the reason for the success, why were they scoring fewer points with him? There's other things to this too. I've had people reach out that worked with him that say he throws everybody on the bus and all that. There are other people that like him, but it's not to say that everybody hates him. But there are people that worked with him that don't like him. I don't know. I look at the situation. I'm like, well, wait a minute. Is he the Marty Schottenheimer of passing? Is he the guy that's going to win you a lot of regular season games with his style, and then you're going to get to the playoffs and not? I think it's a valid question. If you're going to trade that many draft picks for a guy whose Super Bowl came back when Josh McDaniels was in his first season coaching for the Broncos.
You can't disagree with it. I mean, I think it's a huge part of the story when you look at him trying to get back into the coaching ranks, from working at Fox. And we've seen the conversations he's had with Colin Cowherd on national radio and television and stuff like that. Does it surprise you that how much he's playing ball with the Saints and letting them, ask the world for, making a deal to bring in Sean Payton as much as the draft capital it's going to cost?
Well, he doesn't really have a choice. I mean, if he wants to get back into coaching, he's got to play ball. For a guy that quit on his team like that, I mean, it's one of those things. It's at the end of the day, you really don't have a choice. They've got your contract. You sign that contract. That's what you got to do. I think he's trying to do that way because it makes everybody look happy with the situation, even though they're obviously not. If Sean Payton really just wanted to get back into coaching after 1 year, why didn't he go back to the team he quit on? I mean, you know, you think they really wouldn't punt on Dennis Allen and his 25% career winning percentage for Sean Payton? You know, and the other question I have here is, you know, if Sean Payton's the be all end all, why would they consider trading him in division? You know? Like, why would they, to Carolina? So, I mean, and to be fair, I mean, I'm being a bit glib because, yeah, he probably should have gone to another Super Bowl with that bad call. I'm not going to give him the Minneapolis Miracle. If your players defended better, you would have, they would have whatever. But I'm not going to give him that one. But I will give him the bad refereing call. That's not his fault. So, at the end of the day, I'm like, well, what separates Sean Payton from Mike McCarthy? Both of them had elite quarterbacks, won Super Bowl that entire time, and couldn't get it figured out the rest of the time. Super Bowls are hard to win. It's not an easy thing. So I don't want to discredit the fact that he won a Super Bowl, but I just want to say I feel like the legend of Sean Payton far outpaces the productivity of Sean Payton.
Ben, the Cardinals have brought in a couple of different names that could be viewed as head coaching options, but also maybe offensive coordinator options, depending on who they opt to sign as the head coach. Could you see a Frank Reich coming here and being the OC? Or on the flip side, could you see Brian Flores coming here in the right scenario with the right head coach and being the DC? Are some of these early interviews in round one kind of feelers for Monty and Michael Bidwell to say, yeah, maybe he's not our head coach, but we could circle back and see if he'd like to come and be a coordinator?
I think so. And I think it's more likely that Frank is an OC than Brian's a DC. But I think that some of those interviews are like that. Teams do that. Some of these interviews are not interviews for any position at all. Sometimes you want to pick the brain of an organization. Sometimes you're like, why was this organization doing this? I want to pick this person's brain, see what the thought process is. Happens all the time. The Denver Broncos interviewed Eric Bieniemy in the last coaching cycle. They had absolutely no interest in hiring Eric Bieniemy, and Eric Bieniemy will never be hired by the Denver Broncos as long as anyone that saw his tenure at CU as an offensive coordinator is anyone alive that saw that. He will never be a Bronco. But they want to pick the brain of the Chiefs organization. What are the Chiefs thinking in these kinds of things? What are they doing with this? Philosophically, what are they doing? So some interviews may not make sense, and that there may be a reason it may not make sense, is they may not be a real interview. It may be an interview where you're just trying to kind of get a pulse of an organization that you kind of had your eye on, and like, why do they do these things? I want to know this.
The last time the Arizona Cardinals were in this position, Benjamin, from the clouds came Cliff Kingsbury, one of the weirdest ascents to a head coaching position in the NFL in the history of the game. Who is a dark horse that you could give us that could potentially enter the conversation?
Well, I already talked about John Gannon, so that'd be what I would say. But I still think he's going to Houston, but we'll see. As far as any other names, I mean, I've seen all kinds of ridiculous floated out there, from Lincoln Riley to, which is not going to happen. Those kinds of things. I still think Shane Steichen is a guy they should talk to. Mike Kafka is a guy they should talk to. Go look at guys that elevated the offenses they were in, that changed things and elevated the offenses they were in. If you could find those kinds of guys, then maybe that should. Why haven't they interviewed Luke Getsy? Justin Fields looked washed, and Luke Getsy changed the offense around and got productivity out of his legs. He's still going to have to grow as a passer, but at the end of the day, I mean, Luke Getsy got success out of Justin Fields. I mean, he was throwing game-sealing interceptions, but at least they were in those games. So, I mean, find guys that elevate the – don't go to a successful organization and say, I want a piece of that. Go to an organization that traditionally wasn't successful, that's experiencing it now, and be like, I want a piece of that. You took bad and made it good. And while some people could make the counterpoint that Sean Payton did that with the Saints, I would say maybe try to find a guy who didn't do it with an elite quarterback.
Ben, back to the Vance Joseph piece, because I think it terrifies Cardinal fans. Is that a potential reality? And so my biggest thing was, if Adrian Wilson or Quentin Harris got this job, that seemed like a real possibility. But why would Monty Ossenford, who has options, as you mentioned, is well-respected around the NFL, hitch his wagon to Vance Joseph, at least in the interim, when he could go out and get his own guy? It just doesn't make any sense unless you're Michael Bidwell and you say, like, you have to keep Vance. I don't get that at all.
Well, I think the thought process behind it was Michael Bidwell knew he had to fire Cliff, but at the same time did not want to pay Cliff and Sean Payton to be coaching his football team. You know what I mean? Yeah. Coaching contracts are fully guaranteed, so paying out that much money is rough, especially since you just had to put a whole bunch of money in escrow for the Kyler deal. So when you're I don't want to say cash strapped, because that's the wrong word, but when you're hurting for cash relative to the NFL, that can sort of be a problem, paying multiple coaches at the same time. and all that. I think Austin Fort will cast a pretty wide net. I don't think Vance Joseph is in play necessarily anymore. I think that's the if all else fails at this point.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't say that. Vance, I mean, Vance is a player's coach. I think he's better as a head coach than a DC, in my opinion. But he's also like, and I don't know how many of the pressers you guys have watched. How many great weeks of practice did you have? Because that was all he ever said at his press conference. Well, we had a great week of practice. That's all he ever said as a head coach when he was doing pressers here in Denver. And then he kind of lost that team, kind of after a while because after the defensive schemes that he were running were putting guys on islands and really kind of stressing what it was that they were doing. So end of the day, I don't think Vance Joseph is a horrible hire. If you're the Cardinals fan base, I wouldn't melt down about it. I'm not saying I'd be happy about it, but I wouldn't melt down about it. He's got previous experience. He's going to be better in his second go as a head coach. He certainly knows this roster. The one thing about Vance I will say is Vance is a phenomenal talent evaluator. That's part of the reason that got him the gig. He was one of the guys in Cincinnati and in Miami who made some incredibly good personnel decisions. Like, we need to get this guy. So that's a strength of his. If they do keep him around, that's just something to kind of keep your eye on. But no, I don't think Vance is still in play for the head coach. I think that's, if everything else fails, they'll default to that.
I mean, the lack of development from 2 first-rounders like Isaiah Simmons and Zaven Collins, and the lack of playing time they saw early on, I think that's an indictment on Vance Joseph and how poorly they played this year. But let me just ask you this, Benjamin. Obviously, you kind of know what's going on. You've got the pulse going around the league. What would the Arizona Cardinals have to do to maybe become a front runner for the services of somebody like D'Amico Ryans?
I think you got to offer him a long-term deal. The traditional first-time head coaching contract is like 3 or 4 years, right?
Yeah.
I think you need to offer him like a 6-year deal, because that says we're committed to you. We're going to have to pay Cliff Kingsbury. We're not going to fire you and be paying 3 coaches at the same time. We're just not going to do it. So you offer him a little bit of a premium in terms of the money, but a longer deal. I think that says, hey, we're invested in you. We're gonna see your vision through, and that's what's so scary for a lot of these coaches. It's the reason a lot of coaches get scared off. They don't want to blow their shot and get Nathaniel Hacketed, where all of a sudden expectation changes because you've got this all-world quarterback that you just traded for. Now you've got this coach who was expected to grow on the job. Now he's got to win now. And then he gets fired in his first season. So now he's blown his opportunity to ever be a head coach. Who's going to hire Nathaniel Hackett again after that? And who knows what he could have been after 3 years? Nobody's good at anything the first time they do it. It takes time to grow. Now, I felt like Hackett needed to be fired. He was in over his head. But at the same time, like, coaches look at that stuff and they say, well, that organization is quick to pull the trigger. I don't know if I want to hitch my wagon to that, because it might take me 2 or 3 years to get this team where I need to get it.
Ben, you're a big supporter of Dan Quinn. The defensive head coach is kind of out of vogue right now, and the Cardinals are focusing, as are the Broncos, outside of Sean Payton, on defensive head coaches. Why is it maybe a good fit for the Cardinals to get a DC / I don't know, like an executive type of head coach to clean up their mess, as opposed to, another offensive guy like Cliff Kingsbury?
Well, typically what happens in the league is the pendulum swings the other way. After you do one thing, then you kind of swing it the other way, because, you feel like that if you had an offensive coach and he did really well, usually the defense was the reason you're losing, right? So you swing the other way, you get somebody to fix the defense and hope the offense stays good enough. That's kind of how things work in the league. As far as focusing on defense, I don't know that. I mean, here's the thing. There's no correlation at all, none, between how good a coordinator is and how good they are as a head coach. There's no correlation. There is correlation between people having been in executive roles and carrying that success over. Typically, coaches fail in their first try. They do. A lot of them. Look at Bill Belichick, Pete Carroll. Look at all, a lot of coaches do. You get another try, you kind of, now that you know what you know and there's not any unknowns to it, you tend to be better at preparing for that. I don't know that a defensive guy or an offensive guy or whatever really needs to be the focus. I think you just need to figure out the guy who's got the best plan, who's got the plan to fix this, and who has the best succession plan, who has the best backup plan. Like, let's put it this way. Let's look at it from the Broncos perspective for a minute, right? If you're a coach and you're being interviewed, and the first thing they're going to say is, what's your plan to fix Russell Wilson, right? The way you wow that group is, you don't say, well, here's my plan to fix Russell Wilson. You say, here's what I'm going to do for Russ. Here's what I'm going to do if it doesn't work. Yeah. And so that's the thing. Having a plan if your plan fails is the biggest thing. That's what Nathaniel Hackett didn't have. And so what you need to do to be a successful coach is when things go wrong, what are you going to do? When you hit a 4-game losing skid, because it's going to happen at some point, what's your plan? What's your message to the locker room at that point? Hey, this hasn't been working. We took a step back. We figured it out, guys. We got a plan. Trust me. Believe in me. I got you. Let's go out there and do this. Who's the guy that does it? And so I think understanding that and understanding the components of leadership overall is the big thing. I always hate it because, last year during the cycle, I wanted Dan Quinn for Denver as well. And everybody was telling me, everybody in the world, we need a hot young OC. Well, they got one. And we saw how that turned out. And I'm like, no, you just need the best guy for the job. Yeah. And, having that plan, and not just that plan, a succession plan too, because if you're successful, people are going to snipe your coordinators, right? Yeah. So what's your plan to replace them? Kyle Shanahan is a master at that. Look at you're talking about D'Amico Ryans. He's the replacement for Robert Saleh, right? So, an example of a guy who didn't have a good succession plan is somebody we talked about earlier, Frank Reich. His staff got picked apart, and then he had, guys that weren't up to the task as replacements. And that's part of what got him canned in Indianapolis. So you need to, when you're interviewing for a head coach, those are the questions you need to ask, not schematic, are you going to run dagger or mills or, slant? What's your primary play on 3rd and 1? Nobody cares about that. Tell me what your plan is to be the architect of this thing, and show me that you've got the smarts to hire the right coordinators to execute it, and you're my guy.
And so generous with your time, Benjamin Allbright. Real quick, I don't think we ever covered this. It might have been in between hits here. Do you think that the Cardinals ever actually interview Sean Payton? Do you think he will ever get to that moment, or do you think that ship has sailed?
I think a lot of that hinges on Carolina. If he gets Carolina on the hook and Carolina and Denver's bidding each other up, then I think no. I think if Carolina isn't really interested, he needs another party because everybody and their mother knows he's not going to the Texans. So, I think that's the point where he tries to get Arizona involved, whether that's leverage, whether that's serious interest, who knows? Because 2 months ago he was saying he wasn't interested in Denver. So,
yeah.
Benjamin Allbright, I'm going to put you on the spot as we get you out of here. You got a little extra scratch on DraftKings. Who are you putting your money on as the next head coach of the Arizona Cardinals? Doesn't have to be an official prediction, but somebody that you like.
You got the odds in front of you at curiosity? I don't have them in front of me.
Brian Flores is the favorite at plus 300. Peyton's at plus 350. Flores?
I'm taking at plus 300. Yeah, I'm taking Flores at plus 300. Absolutely.
Excellent. That's Benjamin Allbright, NFL insider, the host of Broncos Country Tonight. So generous with your time, Benjamin. We hope to have you back, my friend.
Thanks,
Absolutely,
man.
Guys. Yep. Take care.